and gentlemen, it is my privilege to be back with you all for episode 4 of the Child and Family Justice Initiative, kicking off the new year. We're in the year 2020, which I've renamed the year 20-plenty, because we're going to have plenty of amazing things happening this year. Today, I have a very strong honor of interviewing one of my former professors, someone who's been in many ways a mentor to me, and someone who's left a legacy at the law school, Mr. Preston Sanchez. Preston, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be back. For those who don't know, my name is Preston Sanchez. I'm an attorney at the ACLU, New Mexico. I just started last week, as a matter of fact. And I'm used to saying an attorney at the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, which is where I was for the last 7 years. But I'm also a former adjunct professor here at the law school, teaching the the program known as the Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project. And so I've since moved on from that project, giving it off to also one of my esteemed colleagues at the ACLU named Lalita Moskowitz. Shout out to Lalita. And so I'm happy to be back. Thank you.
So good. And that's what brings us here today. So for those of you tuning in for the first time, my name is Sal Guardiola II. I work under the Child and Family Justice Initiative at UNM School of Law. The reason this initiative exists is this is our law school's response to the horrendous rankings for child well-being in our state. We are talking back, we are fighting back, and we've created an area, a space in our law school for people to people to flourish who want to pursue social justice through the law, specifically geared toward advocating for our state's most vulnerable children and families. One of the ways we're doing that is that we've created a pipeline. A pipeline to the law school is one of our major efforts to try and get a more diverse legal field in the long run by attracting young people from underrepresented communities who will come to our law school, graduate, and practice in their passion. So one of the ways we're doing that is through the Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project. Preston, for those unfamiliar with the project, would you give us an overview, what it is, where it came from, how you brought it to New Mexico?
Whoa. Yeah. So the Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project is a civics education program designed to educate high school students about the social impact of constitutional law. And they do this by exploring a variety of legal issues that arise under the First Amendment, and such as your right to be, such as your freedom or your right to freedom of speech. As I'm saying this, I'm having a hard time with my speech. Your right to freedom of assembly, your right to protest, those kinds of things under those kinds of legal issues that arise under the First Amendment, as well as the Fourth Amendment, which is your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by government entities. And your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, your right to due process. So there's a lot to be said about what this program tries to do to educate high school students about what the social impact is, meaning what is the impact of law and policy as it's implemented in communities, and especially within communities of color and low-income communities. So the program really is designed to teach civics education with a targeted approach towards schools that serve high populations of students who are low income, and populations of students who come from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Yeah. So that's been the aim, and I think there's a lot more to be said about the origins of the national sort of syndicate or the national Marshall-Brennan program that started out at the American University Law School. And then also a lot to be said about what sort of inspired me to bring a civics education program to the law school here at University of New Mexico School of Law. So where do you want to start?
Well, I want to start with this. You were actually a student at the time that you co-founded the UNM School of Law chapter of Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project. What led up to that inspiration, or how did that even become an idea in your mind?
Wow, yeah, so that's a good question. And I took some time thinking about this because I've talked to folks about how this thing got started in my head and my mind, and then the spirit that sort of drove me to, get to this point.
Yeah.
So I think taking a few steps back, I was a law student Well, first, taking a few steps back, I grew up in the South Valley of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I graduated from Albuquerque High, Bulldogs, 2003. What's up?
Let them know.
And, through that experience, I've just had many challenges in my environment. Growing up, a huge, heavy police presence where I grew up, crime, and everything that's associated with being low income, drug abuse, just any sort of community sort of issue that most communities are dealing with now that are problematic. I've sort of I've experienced those kinds of things. So having that sort of background, inspired me to sort of go to law school to begin with.
Wow.
And get into law school. I remember hanging out with a group of friends. We were all law students wanting to do something with the knowledge that we were getting through our education. I knew that there was some sort of service that we couldn't really put our finger on, but it was like we want to do something to help out. We tossed around a bunch of ideas and actually talked to some folks who are familiar with what it takes to incorporate a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. And we wanted to do something. We wanted to establish a nonprofit of some sort, but we didn't know what the idea was. We didn't know what the service was, so we were kind of starting backwards.
Wow.
Eventually, the talk kind of died down. It was mostly just bar talk at that point, But I still had this drive in me, like, regardless of the fact that my friends are, sort of off that topic, there's still something that's driving me to figure out what that is. What is that idea? And so one night I'm hanging out with some friends at a bar and law school buddies, and my buddy's wife, who was an elementary school teacher at the time, teaching 3rd or 4th grade students, told me, as I was talking to her at the bar, just, asking questions about what she does, and she's asking me, about this idea that I have. She mentions the fact that during Constitution Day, which for those of you who don't know, is September 17th every year, on Constitution Day, she had an attorney come to her classroom. And so she's telling me this, and I'm like, oh, what did he do? What did he say? And she's like, well, he came in and he talked to my students about police, and have they ever been encountered by police? Have they ever had to talk to police? Have their parents ever been pulled over? And so I'm asking all these questions, like, well, then what happened? What did he say? What did he do? How did he do it? And she's like, well, he just basically lined them up and kind of showed them what a police search looks like. Nothing explicit or crazy, just here's a general sort of look of what I'm talking about. And so he demonstrated that in the classroom. And these are all elementary school students, keep in mind. So, I was just inspired by that story. And so I'm like, well, who is this guy? And how do I want to do that. I want to be able to do that for high school students. Like, where do I go? Like, give me his contact information. So I reach out to this guy like the next week and ask him, hey, I heard about what you did in the classroom with the students and for that teacher. Can you show me how to do that? Can you take me with you, and I'll just watch and be a fly on the wall, be your shadow, and you show me what you've done and how to do that, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, sure. He's like, I'd be delighted to do it. And so immediately I reach out to a teacher I know, a high school teacher at the Trisco Heritage Academy High School.
Okay.
Way up on Rio Bravo and Rio Bravo and Coors. And I tell her, I got this idea. I want to, can I come to your classroom with this attorney? He's going to help me understand how to deliver a presentation on students' rights during police encounters. And so she's like, sure, that sounds like a great idea. You can come to my government class. It's on Tuesdays and Thursdays at this time and that time. Which time works for you? So I'm like, well, let me talk to that attorney real quick and I'll get back to you. So I reach out to this attorney again. I'm like, hey, a teacher has confirmed us and she wants us to come through, and what day works for you? I wait a day, I wait 2 days, I wait 3 days, I haven't heard back.
Oh no, okay.
So then I reach out to him again, like, hey, are you still able to do this? I'd really appreciate it. We can push it back another week. What works for you? Didn't hear anything. And so this teacher's like, what's the deal? What day do you want to come? Mm-hmm. So I'm at this weird moment where I'm like, I want to do this. I need to do this. The opportunity's there. There's a little shortcoming here that I'm going to have to deal with, but I'm just going to do it. And I talked to somebody I know who's real close to me, who's a mentor, And he basically said, sometimes when you come to these moments in life where you're stuck and you don't know what to do, and you don't have what it takes or you don't think you have what it takes to take the next step, sometimes the best thing to do is just dive in head first.
Wow, let's go.
And so I said, all right, he's right. My uncle's right about this. And so I just confirmed a day, like, I'm going to come by your classroom and I'm going to teach high school students about what their constitutional rights are during police encounters. So I spent the next week or two really just researching, looking at videos. There's some videos that have already been done by attorneys, sort of talking about what your rights are under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. And some of them are kind of cheesy. Some of them are sort of old school. Some of them are not relevant to today's time or today's culture. Mm-hmm. And so it's really just taking what the information is and sort of ciphering it down into something that I think would help with the students that I want to reach out to. So I took what I had. I took a video and I showed a portion of it, and then talked a little bit about what the Fourth Amendment is, what the Fifth Amendment is, and asked a little question and answering sort of segment at the end. And to my sort of surprise, but also to my sort of relief, the students knew the answers to the questions I was asking. Wow, so they were paying attention. They were attracted to this information and to what the presentation was about. So I left there feeling successful in terms of making that first step. Mm-hmm. And thereafter, I just started doing more classes. I reached out to other schools, sometimes randomly, sometimes because someone I knew somebody at a school. And I just said, hey, can I come to your class and talk to them about what their rights are? And so teachers were just accepting. They're willing to have that information presented to their students. So, I started at Trisco Heritage Academy. Then I think I went to South Valley Academy. I went to Albuquerque High. I went to Highland High School. I went to some of the other charter schools in the area. And just made my way and got better with each presentation. And so each presentation I kind of added something, or I changed something based on the responses of the students that who were in my who were the recipients of this information. They were raising good questions that maybe I didn't have the answers to at the time, that I started to research the answers to. So started to really change the presentation as I went along. Mm-hmm. And I got so comfortable making the presentation that I stopped showing the video, and I just made the presentation from scratch. Like, I'm going to actually talk to these students like I'm the attorney in that video, making this presentation about what their rights are, and I'm going to make it more engaging. I'm going to actually have these students come up, and I'm going to pretend that I'm a police officer. I'm going to pretend that that I want them in this sort of hypothetical situation to be able to assert their rights, and I want them to demonstrate that for me, so that I know and they know that this stuff is something that they can learn and apply in real life, in real time. So I got really good at that. And this is like in my second year of law school.
Oh my gosh.
And so as I'm getting into my third year, I continue the project. I actually do my research program, like my course, the 300 course every law student's supposed to take to kind of take on some project under the guidance of a professor, right? Mm-hmm. So Professor Margaret Montoya, who's no longer at the law school, was my mentor at the time, approved this project, and just basically it didn't have a name. It was just Know Your Rights presentations for high school students in traditionally underserved communities. So going into my third year, I did more presentations in more high schools. I wrote about it, and I came across this. It was my last presentation for the semester, and it was the finality for the final presentation for my project for the grade and for the class, for the course. And it was at Rio Grande High School, and it was my biggest presentation thus far. 200 students. I got an invitation from a high school teacher there at Rio Grande High School, and he said, I got this idea. He's like, we did this thing last year or a couple years ago where an attorney came by, talked to the students about what their rights were. Mm-hmm. And he did it alongside an APD officer. And he's like, would you be willing to do that? And I said, yes, definitely. Making a sort of unreasonable assumption that this was going to be like a great presentation where I would come from sort of the academic, scholarly sort of approach with legal principles. What are your rights under the Fourth and Fifth? What do those laws stand for? And then here comes an APD officer with his sort of lived experiences and what he sees offering even more substantive information for students to sort of grasp, to sort of latch onto.
So and so for an overall positive experience where we're sharing knowledge and empowering students.
I'm hoping for like the best presentation where we're tag teaming and we're just like having a good time talking to a room full of students. And that's what, based on the information that was presented to me in the email, like that's what it is. Like you're going to present with an APD officer. Is that cool? Yes. And so I signed up, I show up, I go to the auditorium. So it's this big theater room. We're on a stage. And the room just fills up with, about 200 people, 150 students, and then staff, security, everybody else here to see this presentation.
Right.
So the teacher opens up. So I go to shake the police officer's hand. I go to shake the officer's hand, and he doesn't even make eye contact with me. He just kind of looks the other way and shakes my hand, and then keeps walking.
Okay.
So I'm thinking something feels weird, but whatever. We're just gonna do this thing. I get on stage, we all do, and the teacher says, I'm gonna make the introduction, this is Mr. whatever his name was, and I want to introduce Mr. Sanchez. He's a third year law student at UNM. He's here to talk to you about your rights. And then here's Officer, and I'll just name him Mr. Wiggles. I won't call him out right now, but here's Officer Wiggles, Sergeant Wiggles, Mr. Wiggles, Sergeant Wiggles, and these two gentlemen are here to debate your constitutional rights under the 4th and 5th Amendment. And so I'm sitting back debate?
That's the first time you heard debate?
This is the first time I heard a debate. And so I'm thinking
oh my gosh.
Debate? What are we here to debate? You have rights.
Mm-hmm.
What's to debate about them? So he gives me the mic first and he says, you go first and, go ahead and do what you do. And so I didn't know it's in the context of a debate, but I wasn't prepared for that. I was prepared for a presentation. So I kind of just normally do what I normally do, which is, start talking about what are your rights? What do you say in these situations? If an officer asks you, can I search your stuff? And so students are shouting back to me the answers, and it's actually a positive thing. I'm like, all right. So they actually watched the video I told them to watch, and now, we can talk a little more deeply about constitutional rights. And so, the teacher pauses and he's like, hey, let's give Sergeant Wiggles a chance to respond. And so I'm wondering, what is he going to say? What is this about anyway?
Because how could he say anything to disregard what you just said when it's all factual?
Factual.
Yeah.
It's legal basis.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, Mr. Sanchez, he makes a great point. It's good to know what your constitutional rights are. But you only need to know your constitutional rights if you're a bad person. Only bad people need to know what their rights are. And then at that point, I was like, oh, shit, did he just say that? Is this real? Is this happening? And so then he starts talking if you're, he's like, I'm an officer where if I pull you over and you're honest with me and you just tell me that, you're doing something wrong, or you tell me what you have on you, he's like, do you think I'll let you go? And everybody's like, no, and he's like, no, I'm going to let you go. He's like, just tell me, just be honest with me. If you're honest with me, he's like, I don't care what you're doing. He's like, if you have a little bit of weed or if you have some joints, that's fine. He's like, if you have a pound of weed, that's a different story. But, just a little bit of weed or you're doing something wrong, just tell me what you're doing. Just be honest with me and I'll let you go. And I was like, this is crazy. So the teacher's like, I can see based on Mr. Sanchez's face that he's not happy about this response, so, and I'm not, and I'm pissed at this point. So I'm responding. I'm trying my best at this point to sort of counter what he's saying, because he's saying a lot of things. He was saying nobody's perfect. I make mistakes. The only person that's perfect is the man upstairs. And so I'm trying to counter every little thing that he's saying, but he's saying a lot. And so, my I think my main takeaway is just you're going to have officers that are maybe reasonable or nice, and you're going to have officers like Sergeant Wiggles here who may let you go. But, Sergeant Wiggles isn't going to be in every state or every city or every county,
right,
where you might get pulled over. This is an APD cop. It might be a state cop. It might be a county cop. It might be an FBI agent. It might be somebody in a different place where they have a different approach or attitude, and you're under a different circumstance. And in that regard, you should know how to assert your rights, regardless of whether, you have someone who's as nice as Mr. Wiggles here who's willing to let you walk away if you're honest with them. Like, preserve your right to be silent, or assert your right to be silent, and let the judicial system deal with the charges, if any, or the evidence, whatever the circumstance is. Let the system take care of it the way it's supposed to be taken care of. But don't fold and don't waive your rights in that moment. Was the essential takeaway. But I think what was most inspiring about that presentation was that, for me, I was a new person. I was a stranger to these students. They may have saw something about me that was familiar, just because I'm a brown kid in the hood, just talking to them about what their rights are. But what I noticed about this officer was that he was not only a sergeant, but he was also a coach for that school, and he sort of lived on campus. So his relationship with those students was like this. He could point out students by name in the audience of 150 students. He could say Mr. blah blah blah, Mr. Scott, Mr. Whoever was out there, and he would call them out because he knew them personally. So he had that tight relationship with them, where they would trust him more than they would probably trust a stranger. And so I felt bad about that. Like, there's nothing more I can do at this point as a one-time presenter, somebody who's here for one point in time and they'll probably never see again. And yet this person has that kind of hold where he can say, hey, that you don't need to know your rights. You're not a bad person. Go on with your life. So that was an inspirational moment for me, where I thought, how can we sort of change that? There is going to always be that relationship that he has with the students, but how can we, as law students or attorneys or advocates or community members, begin to sort of change the framework, change the discussion and the narrative about how students sort of see their rights or see civil liberties as being important to their sort of to who they are and to their place in society, right? So that semester ended with that presentation. And about that point in time, Professor Margaret Montoya connected me with the professor who was making his introduction to UNM Law School at the time, who was Professor Dave Sidhu, a constitutional civil rights attorney. Civil rights professor. One of the most awesome people I've ever met. And shout out to Professor Margaret Montoya too, because she's so awesome and just helped me sort of push me in the right direction. But Dave Sidhu came in, and we talked, and he was cool, and he said, I came from D.C. or Maryland, in that area, and there they have the Marshall-Brennan program. And, based on the work that you're doing already, like, I can see us just collaborating and making this a program here at the UNM Law School, and you can be, the person who sort of directs it.
Wow.
And that's how things got rolling. And so we spent the next semester interviewing applicants, people in my class, and then setting up a relationship with the Trisco Heritage Academy, and that became the first school where we implemented the program. And so I started off as a teacher, a Marshall-Brennan fellow there at Trisco Heritage with a classroom of about 40 students, and that has its own challenges, that has its own story, but and then the other law students also became fellows at that school too. So we all just took on different classroom times and schedules, and that's where everything started. So,
Preston, thank you for telling that story. The Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project is so near and dear to my heart. And the first time that I found out about it was actually at an event that the Mexican American Law Student Association put on for incoming first-year law students. So I attended that. You presented, inviting us to think about it. Think about the possibility of being a fellow in the future, or think about the possibility of learning how to do a Know Your Rights training. And it struck me because I thought about even before my legal education started, it got me in this mindset of what can I do while as a law student to impact the community that I'm a part of. And one thing I love too is that when I hear stories from other people who I've interviewed, there's this element of full circle. So you came from the South Valley. A lot of the schools that you went to present at had students who came from the South Valley as well. There's really this element of paying it forward while at the same time giving back. And it's so moving. And I didn't realize, I think the part of your story that I didn't know about was how you really stepped out on your own to make this happen. And that's huge, because as a second-year law student, and one of the things they told us from the beginning was, if you think 1L year is hard, it just gets harder second year, and then maybe third year it's a little lighter. But so you, in the midst of all the rigors of law school, on your own, you go and you volunteer your time to educate a community that you care about, a community that you're from, a community that you're a part of. And it's just huge, because later, in my second year, I became a Marshall-Brennan Fellow, and that was when you became one of my professors. And to think that I got to stand in that place. I was at Valley High School. I was at Valley High School with two of my law school classmates. And I think that space was created years in advance, because you decided to step out on your own, even when no one else was there to, maybe they gave you an introduction to it, but you really had to make it happen. I'm just so grateful. I didn't know there was that kind of legacy to what I got to do during law school, and even now. I want you to talk about the evolution now, because we at the UNM School of Law host the regional moot court competition that falls under the banner of the Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so the evolution of the program, that it couldn't have happened without several key players who helped move the ball along. One of them being obviously Professor Mariam Aranjani, who came from American University Law School, and having that knowledge, having that sort of spirit to guide the Marshall-Brennan program there and be fully immersed in everything that was happening, came to UNM with the intent to institutionalize the program. I think when I and Dave Sadhu helped started it, first founded it and got it going, it was more like a voluntary program, and it was more like a voluntary leadership position that I was serving in. And so all of us were committed to providing this service for high school students, because we all value that and we know the importance of that. But we were all doing it out of the goodwill of our hearts, and with our time, and as it should be in certain aspects. But from that point, another professor of yours, I think, and person who came to help with the leadership was Matthew Bernstein.
Yes.
And so Matthew Bernstein, shout out to him as well, who now is in Maryland. Vermont. That's right. Yeah, he moved to Vermont recently. Good friend of mine, good ball player. Can't say enough about him, but he and I took this program and started to move it in a different direction. And, him sort of becoming the professor in the classroom and me sort of taking care of some of the administrative stuff while also recruiting law students to the program and showing them how to do Know Your Rights presentations. And he and I sometimes would collaborate on the Know Your Rights presentations. And we actually did the big one, the most memorable one that I did with him was we did a Know Your Rights for the UNM football team in 2016, I think. But so Matt Bernstein was one of the key players that sort of helped build this program up to what it is.
Wow.
Professor Yael Cannon, who now is, I believe, in Georgetown.
I think in Georgetown.
I believe so. Yeah, she moved to Georgetown, but she was here for a couple of years. Dave Sadhu introduced me to her, and so she was the professor who sort of helped develop the curriculum, helped organize some of the parts that maybe I didn't have the ability to do, because I was neither a director before this nor an educator before this, so I was kind of just shooting from the hip in a lot of ways. But Professor, Matthew Bernstein and Yael Cannon both have previous educational experiences as teachers, as professors, and so they have that sort of understanding of how to develop a curriculum, how to align the materials to the curriculum, how to think about pedagogical sort of approaches and strategies for working with students, classroom management skills, those kinds of essentials that every educator should have. And so Yael kind of organized the classroom aspect of it, like let's get a class and law students can enroll in that program. And then Matt Bernstein and I, we played our parts in sort of keeping the program moving in the right direction. So after Yael left, Professor Aranjani came in and sort of helped institutionalize the program so that we could get the funding we needed to keep the program going, and also sort of incentivize leadership. Like we want people to stay the co-directors or director of the program and maintain that position for however long they can. So Professor Anjani was essential in sort of getting all of that sort of worked out, and that's been the sort of big picture evolution. I think through other sort of there's other things to be said about the recruitment aspect and the students that want to participate in this program, and their learned experiences through all of it, and also the moot court competition, as you mentioned. So, and I'll talk about that now. So when we first started the program, we knew there was a national moot court competition that our students could compete in, but we weren't there yet. We weren't prepared to sort of send some students to the national moot court, much less did we have the resources to do that.
And when you say students, you're talking about the
high school students, yeah, and the law students in a certain way too. I don't think anybody was really sort of thinking about that when we first broke ground and decided to implement this program at Trisco Heritage. It was just too much at that time. But as we moved along, I think the next year or the year after, we took our first group of high school students to the national moot court competition. I want to say that I think Matt Bernstein was the one that led the students there, or someone else, maybe I.L. Cannon, actually. Professor Cannon was the first professor to take the first group of high school students and law students to the national moot court competition. Okay. I wasn't available at the time. I have the other case that I'm working on. So the Yazi Martinez case, which is irrelevant right now, but that's what kept me sort of here. The years thereafter, though, I think we took them to Washington, D.C. twice, and then once to Boston. And that's the whole group of law students and high school students to compete in this national moot court competition. So every year, the national host, they're usually it's the folks at the American University School of Law who organize a national moot court for the high school students and those schools that have a Marshall-Brennan program. And so every year I think they bring like 20 different Marshall-Brennan program leaders and their students to this program, to this national moot court to compete. And so the way it gets started for us is like we have schools where our law school fellows are teaching currently. So right now I think we have 3 schools, but at a time we've had in the past 5 schools that we worked with, and so we bring those schools together for a regional moot court competition that happens here at the UNM Law School. And the students are at that point have about a month or 2 months to prepare for this regional moot court competition with packets and issues that were already developed by the National Association, the National Marshall-Brennan Program, and all of that information is presented in the classroom in the context of they're just going to focus on that through the classroom curriculum, and just see who's willing to step up and be the person that wants to compete to argue those issues on behalf as a representative for their school and for their class. And so we'll bring from every school, I think like 4 to 8 participants, competitors. And so we'll get the regional moot court competition. And so when we had 5 schools and like 4 to 8 students from each school, you have anywhere from 20 to 40 students who came here to compete to move on into the to the national moot court competition. So, so one year we took, I think we took like 6 students who competed in the regional, made it to the next level, and eventually we took those 6 students to the national moot court competition, which happens sometime in April. The spring semester. So the regional is in the fall, and then the national moot court is in the spring. And so we work with them. For those who move on from the regional into the national competition, we prepare them from like the end of January going into the actual date of the moot court competition. And so we'll spend at least 2 to 3 days a week with those students, working out some of the main problems, helping them sort of build their strengths, and then also work on their weaknesses so that they're ready to go when they get to the national moot court competition. And so I've experienced seeing them progress from being like decent advocates, I guess you can say. Like they show up with the skills that they have of argumentation, their understanding of case law, their understanding of how to present the information in a sort of intellectual way. But then we sort of, the high school student, the law students and myself will work with them to prepare them to even better levels. And so I've seen them make some serious progress. Like it's to the point where you don't really know if you're talking to a high school student or a law school student at the end, because they're competing, they're arguing, and they're in it, and they're passionate, and they're taking new skills and they're making them their own and really just in it, and it's like such a beautiful thing to watch. And so this program has changed, my perspective of like what high school students are able to do. I mean, I think high school students have they have the answers to a lot of things, just with the right guidance in the right direction. I think, you give high school students enough time and you work with them and you're patient with them, you can see some serious progress with students.
That's outstanding. I just remember when I was a fellow and even thereafter being able to take part in the regional moot court competition. It was an exciting day at the law school because you have these students who, for some of them, it is their first time setting foot on a law school.
Right.
And this is not only do they find out it's their law school, being from New Mexico, but when they're doing their arguments, they're in our courtrooms at the law school. And one thing I want to highlight, because I didn't know this before law school, was the difference between mock trial and moot court. Mock trial is in a trial setting, whereas moot court is at the appellate level.
Correct.
So following the trial setting. And I would venture to say in some ways it's more rigorous than being a trial setting because you're getting grilled by judges who are trying to really understand and at times break apart the argument that you came in with and having to answer them in a way that's eloquent, in a way that answers their question. It's amazing because there's so many skills at work, presentational skills, thinking on your feet, analysis and leading up to it. It's phenomenal. And I'm excited to tell you, you may already know, we have 6 students who are going to be going to the national competition at Rutgers University this spring. So we're going to hear from them in some later episodes as far as what their hopes are, how they're feeling about it, and hopefully we'll do a before and after. But it's an outstanding program. I'm so grateful to be part of your legacy, Preston.
Appreciate that, yeah. I'll say something else, too, just about what you said just now, and that's one of the sort of variables, the factors that makes the program interesting are the judges, because in order to prepare for the national moot court competition, we have to invite people to serve as judges who can actually evaluate student performance in terms of how they're arguing. Are they loud enough? Are they saying what makes sense? Are they using the case law? Are they making sense of this information and delivering it the way it should be? But with the judges, you have differences in personality, you have differences in the way they look at the law, the way they sort of want you to present information. So sometimes one judge will say, you did good here, but you didn't do good on something else. Like you did good in terms of like your introduction, but you didn't actually give me a roadmap of where you're going next. And then the other judge will be like, I thought you gave an excellent presentation. The only thing that I think you need to work on is your pitch, So it's like sometimes you have differences and variations in how judges perceive the presentation that it can be a little bit challenging for the high school students and for the law school students who are trying to help them get better because they don't know which information to actually believe. They don't know who to listen to at that point. But what's even more interesting is when you have a judge who's really hardcore, just brutal, doesn't even want to hear your statement of facts, doesn't care to hear anything that's not relevant, that they don't think is important. And so we have this judge, Judge Cedillo, who's one of he's the person that we put at the end because he's the guy that's gonna rip you apart as a high school student. He's gonna tear you down and go, no, I don't need you. Yeah, he does it in a very professional way.
Sure.
He wants to make sure that they're ready.
Right.
And so we and then we have the judges too who show up and they got good questions, but they know that they don't want to destroy these students' confidence, so they have to throw some softballs, but also be a little challenging. And then you get someone like him who's at the end is at the end of a Mario game where he's that's the King Koopa, this is, if you get past this guy, then you're ready for the national moot court competition. I think that's what's also sort of beautiful about this program is we can design it in any way we want. We can set it up however we know is going to be best for developing the minds and hearts of these young people as they move through the program. So
man, that's powerful. I think that speaks to the tight-knit nature of our legal community too, that we would get actual judges to help out our students in terms of preparation and just how they have a vested interest in the success of individuals we're looking at with the hopes of them being part of our bar, our New Mexico State Bar. So it's wonderful. Preston, there's so many things we could still talk about. I mean, we could talk about how instrumental you were in the Yazzie Martinez v. State of New Mexico case. We could talk about how you have dedicated your life to civil rights, 7 years at New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, now this move to ACLU. So we might just need to have you come back.
Sure, man. I'd be happy to come back and answer whatever questions you want to talk about. So my heart is in this kind of work, though. It is working with young people and trying to develop those folks that are up and coming, the new leaders for tomorrow. So that is essentially what I love doing most, is empowering these young folks. It's just, it's how I spend it's what I want to do, either at the top level, doing, a big case like Yazzie Martinez, knowing that it's going to be it's going to have a wide impact on students at large, or at the same time, I also want to be directly involved with young people and how to sort of shape them and sort of get them thinking about their next steps in the world, because somebody once did that for me, so I have to do the same for them.
So good.
Well,
thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, definitely.
Audience members, if you want to connect with Preston, we will have some contact information, the links below. If you want to find out more about the Marshall-Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project or the Child and Family Justice Initiative as a whole, we will also have links to connect you there. It's a wonderful program. We've created a space for people to work in their passion, just like Preston's doing. And just so much thanks to you, man, for laying the groundwork and the foundation for us to continue to grow and continue to go forward.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Definitely.
Thank you.